Today we have Matt Nettleton with Sandler Sales. So Matt started his business here at launch. He's a success story for us. He started his business here, it grew, and now he's off to a different location. I met Matt about 5 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, when I was working at the Purdue Foundry, which is now Purdue Innovates. But I've been every role that I've had as a program director at Purdue and then at the Heritage Group with their hard tech accelerator, and now here, I always reach out to Matt because Matt is one of the best speakers that we have. And every year while I was at the Heritage Group, it's a group full of global hard tech entrepreneurs, people coming in from Israel and Singapore, and he was always ranked #1 workshop. So I'm super excited to introduce you to Matt, and real excited to hear about his 4 roles of a leader. So here he is. Thank you very much.
That's funny. Yeah, she's setting the bar. I want to say I'm Matt. I wandered in off the street. I've never given this talk before. I have no idea what I'm doing, and I'm hoping it works out. But yeah, I've been a Sandler trainer since 2003. I don't know how many people here are familiar with Sandler at all. A little bit. Probably 90% of our reputation comes from doing sales training. The reality is, when we get into an organization, typically we deal with sales leadership, and general leadership. And the general leadership is the part that most gets overlooked. This talk, which actually leads to, we do a 6-week training program that I'll just give you 30 seconds on at the end, really comes from the fact that for a lot of leaders, being in charge of people happens because they were like the best forklift driver, so they get put in charge of all the forklift drivers. Or they were best admins, so they get put in charge of all the admins. Or they were the best salesperson, they get put in charge of all the salespeople. And the playbook is, hey, you're pretty good, make them do what you do. Which is crazy, because there's no philosophy behind it, there's no scalability behind it, there's no common language, which is what we talk about a lot with salespeople. You know, if Peyton Manning walked into the huddle in the Super Bowl and looked around and said, hey, you guys are all well-paid professionals, you're experienced, do your best, ready, break. Didn't call a play, didn't tell anybody what to do, right? Everybody would laugh. But in reality, a lot of the leadership positions that we work in, you know, we go in and we're like, okay, tell me how you do this. And they're like, well, I do it this way. And then the other guy says, well, I do it this way. And then the third person's like, no, they're both wrong. Here's the way I do it. And we're like, well, how do you transfer knowledge? How do you cheat off each other? And how do you have any sort of consistent culture unless you have a system in place? So what we're going to talk about today is essentially an 80% solution, right? Anybody familiar with the Pareto principle? Pareto principle, could you describe it? Yes, so a minority of your inputs produce a majority of your outputs. We're going to cover 4 roles of a leader today, and this is not going to fix 100% of your problems. Right? 4 roles of a leader will cover 80% of your interactions with your employees. But you won't have to think about it because it'll be formatted, thought out, planned. And then the other 20%, you'll be tan rested and ready, just like Nixon in '72. Right? You don't have to think about it, you got all your energy. So we're all about, you know, can we plan as much as we can plan so that we can prepare for what we can't plan? So let's just kind of dive in. Oh, by the way, this should not be a lecture. For you guys, you should probably ask questions and have conversations rather than just sit there and let me talk for an hour. I am more than capable of talking for an hour. As anybody who knows me will tell you, I will also bore both you and me. So here's where we start. Here's how you know you're a good leader. Your team produces results. Right? If your team is not producing results, you're a bad leader. But I will also tell you that just because your team's producing results, you are not a good leader. So, But that's the bar. Now, here's what leaders are actually supposed to be doing. Leaders are supposed to be finding willing and creating able. Right? Finding willing and creating able. So if you think about the people that you work with, right, they're going to be in one of 4 boxes. Now, 2 of the boxes are people who are unable to do or unwilling to do the work. Right? They're not good team players. They're not positive to be around. They don't really add a lot to the environment. And they're kind of split into 2 groups. One group is unwilling and unable, which you need to immediately make available to industry, right? However you want to describe that. The other group is unwilling but able. And a lot of times, that is a direct leadership problem, and that's probably the first thing that we're going to talk about. But knowing that somebody is unwilling and able is super important to figure out whether or not you can keep them on the team. So simply being able is not good. Now, I will tell you, I was a high-performing salesperson at a soft drink company based in Atlanta, Georgia, you may have heard of, called Coca-Cola, and I was a terrible employee. I was a terrible team player. I also lived 7.5 hours from my boss, so they didn't expect me to interact with anybody. But as soon as they would get us together, I was a nightmare, right? Now, when I left Coca-Cola, I was stunned that they survived without me, but they did. They're still out there, and it's amazing to me. A company that started with 95% market share when I got there has 96% market share after I left. I'm stunned, right? And I would use that just to tell you that simply because you have a high-performing employee, if they're a bad teammate, you're going to be better off without them, even though it's terrifying. Now, for Coke, it wasn't terrifying because they barely knew I was there. But for most businesses, you know, they have these people that are just not great, and they just keep them. So let's start with the first thing, and this is the role of a leader that I will tell you a majority of leaders simply don't do. I played college football, and I got recruited. And so Coach Garrett came to my house, Coach Vignon came to my house, and they said, hey, we'd really like you to come play for us. And they sold me on the vision at my house. Then they flew us up as a group of 25 people, and they sold all of us on the vision. And then we all enrolled, and then we showed up, and we started. But when we showed up, they didn't just say, hey, thanks for coming, we'll see you at practice tomorrow, and we'll see you for games on Saturday. They said, hey, we love that you're here. We love that you're part of the group. We're going to have team dinners. We're going to have, you know, a whole bunch of events to bond you as a group, because they were recruiting us not just to the team to play. They were recruiting us to the vision and mission of the company. They had told each of us what our role was expected to be, what position we should play, what things we should do to get ready. I mean, they had given us a whole bunch of stuff to go into it. So when I talk about recruiting as the role of a leader, what I'm talking about is not simply finding new employees because somebody quit, but how much time do you spend selling people on the mission and vision of the company that you're part of? Right? How much time do you spend letting them know that they are part of something that's bigger than them? In fact, people want 3 things when they work for you. First, they want to do stuff that they find interesting, right? I don't know if anybody else here, well, is anybody here an accountant before I take a shot at accountants? Is anybody else here an accountant? Good. So if you said to me, hey, Matt, I want you to do accounting work all day. You're going to sit in this cubicle and you're going to do math. I would not find that interesting at all. It would bore me to tears. I would rather do pretty much anything else. I would also not find it challenging, right? It's adding and subtracting. This does not interest me, right? So people want to do stuff that they find interesting and challenging, right? The example I often use, and I'll just use it here, is if you were recruiting people to be bullfrogs, right? You would say to them, you have to be willing to sit in shallow, muddy water on a lily pad. So you're going to be damp all day. If you don't like being damp, this probably isn't for you. You're also going to need to have a long tongue, right? Frogs without long tongues are very skinny. And finally, in order to truly be successful, you're going to have to enjoy the taste of flies, because that's what the long tongue's for. So if you think about what the organization that you're selling into or that you're getting people to be part of, they have to enjoy who they're going to work with. They have to enjoy the work they're going to do. They have to enjoy the environment. I had a company, it was a software company, and they had done well with inbound leads, but they had hit the point where they had to start like outbound prospecting. And they had 7 salespeople who had never prospected. They hired a new person who was off the charts, effective prospector, super great at it. They threw him in the pool with the other 7 people, and the other 7 people let him stay for 60 days. He created all kinds of activity, created all kinds of leads, and the other people were like, listen, I don't know where you're from, I don't know why you're here, but that's not what we do. And they drove him out. And it was a recruiting problem, because the people didn't understand the mission or vision, they didn't understand why it was there. I mean, it really turned into something that, you know, they didn't find the idea of prospecting to be something they wanted to be part of. So the third thing is people want to be part of something bigger than themselves. And it really doesn't matter, you know, what you're doing. You're working on cool stuff, and you're working on cool stuff, and you're working on cool stuff to you. But you got to make sure that the people that you bring in also believe it's cool stuff, and also believe it's meaningful and bigger than them. So there's a couple things that right off the bat are super important. If you're going to recruit people, you had best have well-written and clear job descriptions, right? I love to do this exercise with management teams that I start to work with. And what I do is I say, I need you to sit with each of your direct reports, and I need you to ask them to write their job description and give it to you. And then after they give you what they think their job description is, I want you to hand them the job description that you have written for the position. Now, the funny thing is, probably 2/3 of the leaders that I sit with, and they hear that and they go, well, what if I don't have a job description? So, well, that's a place for you to start. While they're writing theirs, you write yours, right? But assuming that you have a job description and you trade with your employee, it is amazing to me the number of times that those 2 documents are not connected. Right? You think they're doing this, they think they're doing that. Well, if you want to have something that's not going to work, just have people working on totally different systems, right? So that's the first thing. Here's the second thing about a job description. Your job description should be written in a way that if you are in an interview with a candidate, you can hand them the job description and ask them, hey, could you read this and tell me how you see yourself fitting into this role? Right? They should be able to read the job description and go, oh, that's what I have to do? Oh, that's what I'm expected to produce? Right? It should be that clear. Right? The idea of writing a job description and making it clear enough that somebody can decide whether or not they're willing to do the job, it's so foreign, especially to smaller businesses where they're like, well, no, if you have that job, you also have to be responsible for these 9 things, right? But having a job description allows you to make sure that the person that you're talking to finds the job interesting and challenging and meaningful, right? The next thing we talk about is the research model. Now, the research model, it's a form, and we get you to fill it out ahead of time. And the reason that we do this is, well, pretty much every manager in every interview is looking to convince themselves that the person they're talking to can do the job, right? They don't have anything to score it against. And so we do this research model where we fill out a form and we talk about, you know, what are the results that are needed in this position, so that while you're interviewing somebody, you can see if they've ever produced that type of result. And what are the essential job functions, so that while you're interviewing people, you can ask if they've ever done any of these things. You know, what skills, what experience, what attitude, results, cognitive ability, and what habits. And it's very basic. Like, this isn't like launching rockets. But simply putting this in writing, and particularly if you're in a company with multiple people, and having everybody agree on what you're looking for in an interview from a candidate for each position, it's amazing. I did this with a company that does parking lot striping recently. So it's a 40-year-old company. Their entire business is they put stripes in parking lots. That's what they do. Now that, to me, is neither interesting nor challenging, but to them, it's unbelievable. And they've grown 600% in the last 15 years, and they've just went through an ESOP, and they're creating a lot of wealth, and they're doing great for their people. But what happened was they had to figure out on their 4-man crews that go out and stripe parking lots what everybody's responsibility was, because it couldn't just be, hey, I'm going to tell you what to do today, and you do it. Because they were super high turnover. I mean, it's hard work, it's sunny, it's hot, nasty, right? But when they started to lay out, okay, for the lowest seniority person on a crew, this is what you're responsible for. And by the way, this is what we need to teach you. And when we teach you that, then you can move up to the second spot, then you can move up to the third spot. Now you can be the top guy on a crew. It was an amazing transformation because people started to realize, yes, this part of the job sucks, but I need to learn this so I can do that. And if I can do that, then I can learn this and I can do that. And it created, by putting it in writing, it created a pathway for people to understand, hey, if you do this, you'll be part of the team, and your part in the team is important, and there is progress to be made, right? So this research thing really becomes an interview rubric, but it also is kind of a path that people can follow, right? It gives you a clear set of guidelines of what people need to know. Now, here's the next thing. We believe that when you're recruiting people, you should use objective data. I'm going to go back to football. When I played football, the coach that recruited me and got fired after my freshman year, and the coach that got hired after my freshman year and ended my career, were looking for different things from a linebacker. They came in with here's how fast I want you to be, here's how tall I want you to be, here's what your wingspan is, here's the fitness testing that you have to be able to pass. Two totally different models, right? We believe that in every position in your company, you can do objective testing, not to find out if somebody's perfect, but to find out whether or not they have strengths you are looking for and weaknesses you can live with. Right? Because everybody has weaknesses, right? We just have to decide whether or not the weaknesses that you bring are weaknesses we can live with. So I had another different tech company that you would know, that they told me early on, you know, we'll do the job description thing and we're going to do the research model thing, but we're not going to use objective data because objective data doesn't work. And then they used objective data, and the candidate they hired just before we started using objective data had a real bad habit of not showing up anywhere on time. Well, one of the 30 competencies that our objective data measures is time competency. And on a scale of 0 to 9, he scored a 1. 1's bad, 9's good. He was terrible. And so I looked at the manager who told me that objective data was useless, and I was like, do you think maybe knowing this ahead of time, you could have avoided the constant calls I get about how do I handle this, how do I handle this, right? So when we talk about objective data, we're going to find things that your people are good at, your candidates are good at. We're going to find people your candidates are not good at. But we're not going to find necessarily whether or not they're good at it. What we're going to find is whether or not it's natural. Yes? Right. So, well, so if I give you a test about yourself, I can collect information about what is natural for you. So what things you're wired to do. So here's the example I would use. If I gave you a pen and told you to write your name, would you use left hand or right hand? Right, okay. Now, that would tell me that you're right-handed. It will not tell me whether or not you're good at writing, right? So my mom had writing that they could make textbooks from, right? It was perfect cursive, it was beautiful, it was awesome. My son, also right-handed, writes like a squirrel on acid. Like he's got everything that a doctor needs except the income and the education, right? I mean, it's terrible, but he does it naturally, right? So when we do an evaluation, we're finding evidence, not proof, right? So I'm going to find, oh, you have a time competency of 1. So tell me how you manage your time. Tell me how frequently you find yourself being late. Give me examples of systems you've built to hide your weaknesses, right?
How long do you go over response? People acknowledge I have no way of getting myself.
Well, so here's what'll happen.
They have to know you're asking for that when you're.
But here's what happens. They'll say, oh no, I absolutely don't have that weakness, in which case you know they have no self-awareness, right? Or they'll say, yes, that's a struggle, here's what I do, right? So I was talking to a guy last week who actually held up his watch and said, oh yeah, that's me, I'm 15 minutes fast. Because I know if I look at my watch will convince me that I'm actually late, even though and so he's just built this little game with himself to be on time, right? So there's all kinds of things that we'll find out about people that they are wired for. What we're trying to figure out is, are they aware and have they actually changed? Yes?
So the guy who is chronically late, from the executive, does it show what his strengths are?
Oh yeah.
So you've got some strengths.
Yeah.
He would be on the team, and you build these job descriptions around individual strengths, and you're trying to build out a diverse team.
So here's what objective data lets you do. Objective data lets you decide whether or not the person you're talking to has some strengths that you're looking for and has some weaknesses that you can live with. The reality is, if you put somebody into a company, they have to be able to perform a function. But nobody, if I were to give you all the exact same job, nobody would do it the exact same way, right? So I have to be aware as a leader that Tommy's going to do it different than Matt, than you, but I need to know what things are you going to screw up that he's not going to screw up, and what things is he going to screw up that you're. So I've got to have in my mind kind of a template that I'm shooting for. This is ideal, and by the way, here's where I got to watch Ashton. Here's where I got to watch Tom, right? So I'm using the objective data not to get the perfect employee. I'm not using the objective data to make the job that much different. But the way that you play the job, right, the music, I give everybody the sheet, everybody plays the music differently. I've got to realize that everybody's going to play the music differently. So I can give you other examples of that. I can tell you, like in sales, there are people that are great at cold calls on the phone. There are people that are great at walking in. There are people that are great at going to networking events. Right? There are people that can do all kinds of things, but I have yet to meet somebody that can do everything. I just have to put them in a position where their skills allow them to succeed. So, any other comments? Does that make sense? So, does that make sense on objective data? Well, it's objective data because it's clear wiring. It's EEOC validated that says this is accurate. Can't use it if it's not. By the way, you can't use it on one job candidate and not on another. If it's part of your hiring process, you got to use it for everybody. If you use it for everybody, you got to use it at the same step, right? So you got to run a fair process. But it's going to give you clear, repeatable, measurable data that will allow you to figure out whether or not the person that you're talking to is likely to do the job and what systems you have to adjust. Yep. Yes. I didn't see that happening, right? Because most people will have their best day at work ever during their interview. Like that hour, I've been with my wife since 1993, but I will tell you, everybody looks good on a 1-hour date, right? You can hide all kinds of stuff for an hour. So my wife hates when I mention that. Yes, yes, and later on, so I actually met my wife at the Alley Cat, for those of you who know what the Alley Cat is in Broad Ripple. So yeah, so she constantly says, yeah, you gotta be careful about that. So here's the next thing, mission, vision, and values. Most companies have them. They're framed, they're in a quarter, and they're dusty. Nobody's looked at them for a few years, but you knew there was a book that said you had to have them, so you wrote something out, right? I will tell you that if you want to convince somebody they're doing something that's bigger than themselves, ask them how they see themselves fitting into the mission, vision, or values of your company. Bring them up. Have conversations about them. Talk about them. I'm a college football fan, and James Franklin getting whacked this week. People are like, yeah, he lost a bunch of games, but think where he started with Penn State. For those of you that are like, he restored the basic, like the mission, vision, and values of Penn State football, right? And that was one of the reasons that all of a sudden a bunch of old players are involved again, and everybody. I mean, if you're a football guy, you get mission, vision, and values just inherently. So, but your organization should have a mission. You should have values, things that you expect people to do. You should have a vision of what success looks like. Right? You should be able to say to somebody, hey, do you buy into this? Do you see yourself actually kind of wanting to accomplish the things that we talk about? Because it's real easy in any job, regardless of what it is, to get sucked into the tasks, which are the how, and lose the why, which turns it into a death march with cocktails, which nobody wants, right? So we think you should have that. Now, here's the second piece, training. As a leader, a large part of your job is that you have to train, right? My first day in football practice in college, Coach Vignon was the linebacker coach, and he looked at me and he yelled, Nettleton, there's 53 ways you can hold your hands as a linebacker. Here's the one that works for us, right? It's not that the other 52 are wrong, but here's the one that we do. And so regardless of the position in your company, there's probably a way to fill out expense reports, call reports, TPS reports, answer the phone, leave a voicemail, set up your LinkedIn profile, right? There's just a litany of things that people have to do in a certain way. And part of your job is to make sure that your job description is a roadmap to what somebody needs to learn how to do. It's not enough to just say, hey, this is the job description, figure it out. You should be able to say, hey, this is the job description, and then here is a 90-day plan where I'm going to teach you the things that you have to be able to do our way. So this is, again, very tactical, but one of the things that we teach our clients to do is get a pad of Post-it notes and start to write down on each one thing per Post-it note, each thing you think somebody has to be able to do in order to perform a job function. And then on a wall, you start to hang those Post-it notes, but you put them in order from what you teach first to what you teach last. Then you transfer it and you put it on a weekly schedule where you say to somebody, hey, listen, we got 12 weeks of training. Here's what you're going to learn in week 1. Here's what you're going to learn in week 2. Here's what you're going to learn in week 3. And here's the amazing thing. When you give the list to the person ahead of time, they will hold you accountable to teaching them what they need to do to be successful. If you keep the list secret, or if you're like, I'll make it up while we go. You don't complete the list, and then you get mad because they don't know how to do the thing you want them to do the way you want them to do it, right? And so this is very simple. I will also tell you, it usually takes somewhere between 5 and 7 attempts to get the onboarding right, because you're not onboarding anymore, and you're at a higher level of position, and you already think a lot of this stuff is just automatic. And how could anybody not know that? When I worked for Coke USA, my boss took me to the Black Cat Lounge in Beloit, Wisconsin for my first meeting, because we picked me up at O'Hare, put me in the company car, and said, okay, we're gonna go to Madison, but we're gonna stop in Beloit. I'm gonna explain to you what this job thing is. So we sat down, and he got out 2 magazines, Beverage World and Beverage Digest. I was like, what is this? And he's like, oh, these are magazines that you'll get every week. So this was pre-internet. Like, we used to get magazines in the mail. They were like pieces of paper glued together, stapled together. It's wild, right? But we would go up, and we would sit down, and he said, okay, here's 2 magazines, Beverage World, Beverage Digest. Here's the deal. You'll get these every week. I expect you to read them cover to cover. We'll have our conversation on Wednesday mornings. On Wednesday morning, I'm going to ask you 3 separate questions based on articles in these magazines. You need to score 100 on every one of these quizzes. I didn't know anything about Beverage World or Beverage. It sounded like the dumbest magazine ever. Like, who would read these? But that was what the people I was going to call on talked about. That was what they were worried about. And so it was business acumen that I needed to have as a 22-year-old that I had no idea of. And it forced me to learn, all right? Now, sadly, I don't know that either magazine still exists. I certainly don't read them anymore. No, I don't read them anymore. In fact, haven't read them since like 1995, which I'm glad about. But in the end, every position has some version of business acumen you can gather through consistent learning, right? So onboarding is important. You should start there. But as you're building Willing and Able, you also have to start to think about the problems that your people know how to solve, right? So when in sales training, we talk about, you have different sizes of clients, and they have different levels of problems. Well, every position that you have in a company addresses a different level of problem. As a leader, your job is to figure out, what do I need to train people to do in order to get them to take the next more complex problem on, right? So I've got to teach them, when I was with Coke as a territory sales manager, I was allowed to call on restaurants that had 0 to 4 locations. As a territory sales manager too, I was allowed to call on restaurants that had between 5 and 20 locations. As an account executive, I could call on between 21 and 50, and as an account executive too, I could call on between 51 and 100. And we were like, if you showed up and you turned in a call report and it had a different number of restaurants on it, like, they would kick it back, you'd get reprimanded. It was like, that's not your account, you're not allowed to call on them. They were super strict about it. But the whole time that you were calling on the smaller group, they were teaching you how to deal with the bigger group, right? Now, I've seen people who are coders, I've seen people who are admins, I've seen people who are operations people, and they start to break their problems into series of difficulties. And they start to think about, okay, where do I think this person can handle, and what do I think they need to know in order to handle the next level of complexity? And they start doing some ongoing training, right? Using objective data again, because I got to deal with the person's strengths and weaknesses. I'm going to design an individual training needs assessment. Everybody is going to need totally different things. So as you look at your employees, they don't all need to be trained the same way, although they need to have a common training language. And you've got to figure out, what is it that I'm doing? And you need to document it, right? One of the things that I hear about a lot from employees is that yes, my boss has a company-wide book club, and we all have to read the same book, but that book doesn't relate to me, right? What we're really trying to do is it's okay to have a common book club kind of deal, but it's more important to have something that is uniquely driven to them. Right? So you can say, hey, listen, we've got common training and we've got individualized training. And training is something that you can do one to many and you can do one to one. Training is defined by delivering information to somebody that they don't previously have that information. So you're teaching them something they don't know. Right? And so you're doing that. Oh, good. All right. So here's the third role. Third role of a leader is supervising. So let's start to break this down. What % of time should you spend supervising people if you've done your job correctly? A little bit. If it was a percent, what would it be? 7. I like that. Meaningfully specific. Not 10, not 5, 7. Do you want to put a decimal on that? Okay. Anybody else? 25%? Anybody else? 3%? All right. Your time. Supervising. So here's our belief. That's probably the best thing that anybody has said today, right? Bar's been set. So in our belief, supervising is the act of looking at somebody and saying, did you do what I trained you to do? Right? You can't supervise somebody doing something you didn't tell them how to do. Right? So my son, who's now 25, but like he had size 12 feet as an 8th grader, used to leave his shoes in the middle of our kitchen floor. That was like his spot. And I would say to him all the time, hey, listen, I don't mind yelling at you. I'd like to yell at you for something different. Is there any way we can put your shoes somewhere else? Like, it's consistent, right? But you can't get mad at somebody the first time they do something stupid. You can only get mad if you train them not to do it. Supervision's kind of the same way. It is very funny to me. There are people that are like, I think it takes half my day to supervise people because they're never doing things the way I want them to. Well, that's not a supervising problem. That's a training problem, right? So see how this kind of builds, right? I'm looking for people who are willing to do the work, and I'm giving them the able by training them. If I get somebody who's willing, and I give them the able, then all I have to do is really ask the question, did you do the thing I taught you how to do the way I taught you to do it? Right? We think that pretty much every job can be supervised by cookbook. Regardless of the position, you can come up with some set of metrics that can be measured over a daily or weekly basis to figure out whether or not the person that you're talking to has done what you trained them to do. Did you make enough calls? Did you answer enough service complaints? Did you do enough coding? I mean, we've seen people provide this type of cookbook leadership in a wide variety of positions, from loading trucks and running a forklift, through coding, through customer service. I mean, there's just a whole bunch of things that can be measured. And the real trick in measurement is it has to be agreed. Right? I can't say to somebody, here's your cookbook. This is what you're going to do. I have to be able to say to them, here's what this position in the job description and in the search model, here's what this position is expected to produce. Right? Here's how we measure it. Are you okay with that? By the way, every once in a while, you'll have somebody that says, oh no, I'm not. All right, we're back to recruiting now. Right? You should have seen some version of this when we got you into this position. And if you're not willing to do it, I need to put somebody in that chair who is. Right? And then it's not me against you, it's me and you against the chair. And you have to decide whether or not you want to be part of it. Is that a question or just a, no, perfect, okay. So we're really looking at, can you come up with a consistent level of behavior and a consistent output that the person's willing to commit to? And they may not be, in which case you might have to make them available to industry, right? I mean, it's just, not everybody's right for every position. And if you don't do cookbooks, we're big believers in scorecards. This is more for a position that you can measure behavior over a weekly period rather than a daily period, right? Part of my belief is that most jobs by most people are going to be done slightly differently. And so if I have a series of activities that are acceptable in this position, and I say to somebody, listen, you need to give me 200 points, and if you do this, it's worth 1 point, you do this, it's worth 3 points, and you do this, it's worth 5 points. I can let them pick their own adventure, as long as by Friday at 4, they can hand me a sheet of paper and say, hey, I've done 200 points of activity. And I can be fine with that, right? And then I've also seen people who on a quarterly basis will add something in or take something out because they want somebody to focus on a specific area, and they need something specific done. So cookbooks and scorecards are all about, did you do the thing that I trained you to do? And here's pretty much the entire supervision part of it. You look at it, and either it's marked and completed correctly, or it's not. Yeah. Yeah. And that one of the things with remote work that's hard is people have kind of conflated, capturing a mouse moving with supervising, or talk time with having a valuable conversation. And so they take all these measurements that don't necessarily equate directly, and they just try to trick the supervision. I want people to do stuff that's actually meaningful, right? That produces a result that I'm looking to accomplish. And if I can't measure anything that's a leading indicator, if all I give them is, here's the lagging outcome I'm looking for, well, the lagging outcome is not really something I can help them with, right? By the time we get to the lagging outcome, you either succeeded or failed. But it's too late. Like Sunday night film with your football team, you either won the game or lost the game. I can't help you at that point. But if I can get, hey, look, I know this project's going to be 9 weeks, but I know that we got to get this level of activity in week 1, and you miss this level of activity in week 1. Now I know, hey, before we get into week 2, we got to catch up from week 1. I can start to coach you and help you with that. So remote work obviously got sprung on us in a big way, right, when we had the flu. But that's something that not training and not recruiting for makes a lot harder. Because now I don't know, can you work in this environment? Do you want to work in this environment? Can you do this thing? Are you interested by this thing? And oh yeah, you're 7.5 hours away. So when I worked for Coca-Cola, I was 23. I was living in Madison, Wisconsin. I had an expense account in a company car, and my boss was in Omaha. And it was fun, but he had a series of things that he expected me to do on a regular basis to check whether or not I was actually bothering to work. And so I was there for 29 months, 11 days, and we had 7 inches of snow on April 29th, and I called up and I said, I'm out, because snow on April 29th is not cool. But he built a habit in me that, hey, you got to have 10 calls a week. You got to have your expense report in the mail to me by Saturday. You got to have your call plans into me. It was very regimented on checking on leading indicator behavior consistently. So, did that answer that? All right. All right, here's the final part of this. Coaching, right? So, recruiting is finding people who are willing and able to do the thing for the group, right? That should take about 20% of your time. Training is delivering new knowledge so that the people that you found who are willing to do the thing for the group are able to do the thing for the group, right? You're teaching them. That's about 30% of your time. Supervision is, did you do the thing that I trained you to do? The way that I trained you to do it. Pretty cut and dried, right? If I run into a situation where they are unwilling or unable to do the thing, I'm either moving back to training or recruiting. But if I supervise and I say, did you do it? And they say, yeah, I did it. Then I can say, great. Now I'm going to spend 40% of my time helping you do it more effectively. Right? So now I'm going to show you, hey, yeah, you did the 100 level of whatever this is. Let me show you how the 200 level works. Let me show you some of the other things that you could do. Let me show you some other systems we built. Right? So sometimes it's somebody's got this custom report they've created. Now I'm showing you how to use this custom report because you got the basics. So you know what the report means. Now this will let you take that next step. Sometimes it's, oh, you're a coder and you did that coding. Great, that's good coding. It's clean. It's exactly the way we want it. Let me show you how to do it even more effectively. Now, training can be one-to-one and training can be one-to-many. Coaching is one-to-one. You cannot coach a group of people. In fact, if you try to coach a group of people, you will lose people because they will be embarrassed when you tell them they've done it wrong in front of everybody. Because that's not the way people want to learn. They don't need to be told that they're doing it wrong in front of everybody. So coaching has a very specific kind of process to it, right? We think it's a cycle, and it starts with assessing, right? So if I'm going to coach somebody, we have to mutually assess what is currently happening. We have to be able to look at the situation and say, here's where we are currently. This is our as-is situation. This is what's happening, right? Then we have to establish what we want the situation to be, right? We have to be able to say, okay, if this is as it is, here's how we want it to be. Once we figured out what we want to be, then we have to figure out which of the three options we want to play on. Do we want to do more? Do we want to do better? Or do we want to do something totally different? Right? So more is, more cowbell. Hey, you're doing good work, you're just not doing enough work. We need you to do more of that. Or you're doing it, and I understand you're kind of hitting the minimum of what I trained you in, but I need you to do better than that. Or, hey, listen, I've watched you do what I taught you to do, and the result that it's producing is not what we want. So now we're going to have to do something different. Right? Sometimes it's because I didn't actually understand exactly how to train them to do it. Sometimes it's because the outcomes changed. Sometimes it's because something about them, they're just not able to do it exactly the way I want, but I can get them to do it if I can be flexible. The third one is the least likely option. Usually, you're not doing what I told you to do the way I told you to do it. Once we define that, I'm going to send them back out. I'm going to get them to execute, and then we're going to watch film again. I'm going to go back and assess. Right? Hey, before we were here, we agreed on that. Now we're here. Can we agree on this? Now that we're here, is this where we want to be? Is this our ideal state? Is this as good as it gets? Right? And we're going to go in and we're going to go through the cycle again. And it's just a cycle. So that's like 40% of your job. So any questions on that, coaching? It can be. Well, you're delivering new knowledge. Right. Right. Well, let me help you do it more efficiently. Let me help you do it more effectively. Yeah, I'm not necessarily correcting them. I'm helping them steer. Right? And the thing, one of the things that I see is that because leaders don't separate coaching and training, they end up doing a lot of situational training. So somebody gets into a situation, leader comes by and says, let me tell you how we handled that in my day. When I was in the field, this is what we did, right? And it turns into training, but it's kind of not effective training because the way it's delivered only makes sense in that situation. And if that situation doesn't happen that way again, so it's just, you've got to really think when you're training somebody, you're delivering knowledge to them that they don't have. Now, it is possible to fine-tune training over time as part of a group, but coaching is really, hey, you've got the knowledge, I've actually seen you execute, I can just help you be more effective. All right? And coaching done one-on-one can turn into mentoring where you're actually training your replacement, which is kind of cool. It's when you really get super advanced with that. We believe that you're going to have a coaching contract. The coaching contract is when you make a deal with the person that you're coaching. And you talk about why you're coaching them, right? So how many people have had punitive one-on-ones scheduled on a regular basis with either a boss or an employee, right? Punitive one-on-ones are no fun. And in my experience, a lot of one-on-ones are scheduled because we were told we had to have one-on-ones, so we've scheduled one-on-ones, right? If you have a coaching contract and you can say to somebody, hey, I want you to understand what the purpose of these meetings are. And I want you to understand this is what we're going to be talking about in our coaching meetings. And we have a time and we have an agenda, and you get to bring your agenda and I'll bring my agenda. And by the way, I have a role and I have a process, and we're going to talk about, we're going to assess where we are. We're going to talk about where we want to be. We're going to lay out a plan to get there, and then we're going to take measurements of what you do so that we can come back and repeat this. All of a sudden, it starts to feed itself in a positive way rather than, hey, tell me what you do here. Did you fill out your TPS reports? Did you get the memo about the TPS reports? Did you see the memo about the new reports? Right? And you start to think that, hey, I'm not really doing anything but hitting a button, right? We want people to see that we're actually helping them learn something new and execute it more effectively. So, of course, we have a form for that because everything requires a form. But the discipline of filling out a form actually forces you to realize when you haven't done something. And when you fill it out, you will most likely fill it out incorrectly, which you won't really realize until you actually use it. And once you use it, you're like, oh, I need to change that. Or, oh, I need to write this differently. Now, here's the other thing. With a coaching contract, you can't do it to somebody. You have to do it with them. Because every member of your team is going to want to be coached a little bit differently. Scott and my son played rugby for the same guy. And Trout was a yeller. And he loved to yell. And I actually looked at him my son's freshman year. I'm like, man, I hope you coach my kid as hard as you coach that kid. He's like, what? I'm like, oh no, I expect you to hold my kid just as accountable as you held that kid. He's like, nobody ever says that to me. I'm like, well, now they have. Right? But not everybody wants that. Some people you need to speak a little bit more softly to. Right? And so you've got to figure out the style of the person that you're coaching. How do they want to learn from you? Right? And then you've got to agree to it. And again, it can be a tough conversation. You know, there are some conversations that we teach from a management standpoint where we name them. Like there's a word on the street conversation, which is, hey, this is what I'm hearing from other people. Is it true? There's a, is this as good as it gets? Hey, we've talked about this. This continues to happen. I just need to know whether or not I need to resign myself to this level of performance. There's a, how are you hoping I would react conversation. Like, hey, this just happened. Before I take action, I need to understand how you're thinking I'm going to handle this. By the way, your kids hate that conversation. My kids have had that conversation quite a few times, right? And then there's probably the conversation that has made the greatest difference from a coaching standpoint in my life, which is the guns on the table conversation. And that's the conversation where you say to the person that reports to you, all right, here's the deal. We're going to walk into this room. We're going to take our guns out. We're going to lay them on the table. We're not shooting each other. We're going to have a hard conversation. We're going to be brutally honest. We're probably going to disagree. We're going to have strong opinions. And when we walk out, we will have a united front. And if we don't, that's okay. It just means our relationship ends. But if we do, we're not rehashing all the stuff that we talked about in there. We're just going to move on. And once your people know that these are the meetings that you're having, because it's in your contract, because you've established the rules ahead of time before everything went sideways, it's real easy to call somebody up and say, hey, I need you in the office on Tuesday. We need to have guns on the table talk. And they show up and they're ready to go, right? But a coaching contract requires both parties to participate. All right, that's the model. So those are the 4 roles, right? You've got to recruit, find the people who are willing and are willing to learn to be able. You've got to train, which is you take the people who are willing and make them more able. You've got to coach, or you've got to supervise, which is, did you do what I taught you to do the way you taught I taught you to do it? And then you got to coach. Let's see if we can't make you more effective. So that's it. Now, so that's my contact information. The QR code is to get information. We do a 6-week course. It starts the 2nd week of November. 6 one-hour sessions, all virtual. We actually start with this profile. We run through each of those 4 roles and give you specific forms and tools and techniques and online reinforcement to actually do the stuff that we just taught. So if you fill out that form, we'll send you information, have a conversation, see if you're interested. This is not sales related. This is general management stuff. Happy to talk to you about it and answer any questions. I think we're pretty much right on time, 12:56.